us this hour. Really happy to have you here. So these are Trump voters. These are people who voted for Donald Trump in this past election. They are all voters from swing state Michigan.
So by a show of fingers, who approves of what Elon Musk has been doing in the Trump administration? None of you. And who disapproves? All 7 of you. Cheryl, tell me why you disapprove of what Musk is doing.
Because he wasn't elected to do anything. Like I don't understand his position. It's a made up position that they made, department or whatever. And he's been going through with the sledgehammer, just actually dismantling everything with the approval of Trump. So I'm almost at the point where did he actually buy the election to do what he wanted to do? Like who's running our country? He was even in the Oval Office during a meeting with his kid on his neck. Like what? I feel like we are a reality show. America is. It's awful.
It's awful. And these are all Trump voters. This is an Engageus focus group done with Trump voters this past week in Michigan.
So someone listening to you folks might say, he was president for 4 years. You knowingly chose to put him back in office, having watched him in office for 4 years. It sounds like a number of you are surprised by what he's doing. How can you be surprised?
I don't feel like he was this aggressive last time, so I don't think anyone would have voted for him if they expected to see what we're seeing now.
I don't understand the need to piss every other country off. Like Canada. Like we love Canada, don't we? Like my whole life, there's never been a problem with Canada, and all of a sudden, now we're like trying to create issues with Canada. I don't know.
I thought he was going to change things with affordability and make things cheaper, but by putting these tariffs in and terrorizing the world, now things are just going to get more expensive, I feel like, than they already are. So everything I believe is going to happen, I think, is going to go the opposite direction.
I feel like a lot of his actions have just been disruptive and creating chaos.
He didn't come out and be real with us and say, hey, I'm going to cut hundreds of thousands of jobs and you could possibly, your bills are going to go up. Like, that wasn't campaign day.
Kayla, I just want to circle back to you for a second. So, you voted for Trump in 2024, but you've been very critical of him so far in our conversation. Someone watching this might say, why did you vote for the guy?
Sure. I think what he campaigned with and compared to what he's doing is pretty opposite.
Yeah, I didn't see this coming. I didn't think he was going to take these points of views that he's taking.
It's upsetting. I thought that his first 100 days, like he talked about, would be so much better than they are. It's a little frightening too. He's so erratic, and it's getting to the point where I'm almost scared to watch the news. I mean, it's a little bit frightening.
These are Donald Trump voters, Donald Trump 2024 voters in Michigan. And they say they not only feel confused and frightened by what Trump is doing now that he's president, they're worried. In some cases, they're more than worried. They are convinced that this is all heading to the worst possible place.
If the people that we elected to be his checks and balances don't check and balance him, then what are they there for? They're closest to him than we are. And I just see it going in a direction that's dictator.
I mean, if they don't check, if Congress doesn't check him, he'll just continue to, go his own way and just, drag us down with him.
He's acting like a dictator. He's basically letting, what he says goes, and he's not getting approval from the people, Congress. He's not taking the appropriate measures to put things in place. He thinks he's it. He's in charge. He's a king. He's a dictator. He's, running everything.
No, I feel that he thinks that he is a king. he had the crown on. Right now, we almost have to accept the fact that we're in a dictatorship. I mean, I don't. What he says goes. He controls the government. He controls the attorneys. He's going into the offices saying he's retaliating for what they did to him. Like it's chaos. Yeah, he thinks that he's a dictator, and there's nothing anybody can do to stop him. He has immunity from everything. So how are we to strip him from his powers? How can we put him in jail? Like, who's going to do it?
Those are all voters who voted for Donald Trump in swing state Michigan this past election. A couple things on that dictator point they're making there. A couple things on that from today's news. Today was yet another really, really bad day for Donald Trump in court. Today, 24,000 people who Trump has fired from federal government jobs got reinstated thanks to a court order from a federal judge in Maryland. This is the lawsuit that was brought by 20 Democratic attorneys general in 19 states and Washington, D.C. This judge's order today forces the reinstatement of, again, 24,000 people that Trump has fired from 18 different agencies. The Education Department, the FDIC, which is the agency that provides insurance so your bank deposits are insured and you don't have to worry about them going away if you put your money in a bank. They're going after FDIC too. Yes, they are. The Commerce Department, Health and Human Services, Energy Department, the VA, Interior Department, Labor Department, USDA, General Services Administration, the Small Business Administration, the Transportation Department, the Treasury, the EPA, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, USAID. Again, 24,000 employees fired by the Trump administration from those entities, reinstated by that court ruling today. And speaking of USAID, additionally, on top of that ruling where USAID employees are reinstated by court order along with all those other agencies, a standalone blockbuster ruling from another federal judge today specifically ordering the Trump administration to reconstitute USAID and stop their efforts to shut it down, even to let them back into their building. The judge in this case said that the shutdown of USAID, quote, likely violated the United States Constitution in multiple ways. And in his very short 2-page order today, he ordered that the Trump administration must reopen USAID. This is from the order. This is interesting. Quote, for purposes of the order, defendants refers to Elon Musk in his official capacity, the United States DOJ service, and their officers, agents, servants, employees, and attorneys. Also, all individuals who at any time since the inauguration have served in the role of DOJ team member or DOJ leader, regardless of the formal personnel status of that individual. So the defendants here, everybody associated with Elon Musk and DOJ. And those defendants are, quote, enjoined as follows. Defendant shall reinstate access to email, payment, security notification, and all other electronic systems, including restoring deleted emails for all current USAID employees and contractors, whether in active status or on administrative leave, meaning for all the people they've tried to force out of the agency too, they need to be reinstated, they get all their emails back, they get all their systems back. Defendant shall provide written confirmation to the court that this requirement has been satisfied within 7 days of the date of this order. Also, defendant shall not take any action or engage in any work relating to the shutdown of USAID, including placing employees on administrative leave, employee terminations, reductions in force, contract terminations related to any USAID employees or contractors. There can be no termination of USAID contracts or grants, no closures of USAID buildings or bureaus or offices, no permanent shutdowns or terminations of any USAID IT systems. Within 14 days, defendant shall submit to this court a written agreement among all necessary parties that ensures that USAID will be able to reoccupy its building, will be able to reoccupy USAID headquarters at the Ronald Reagan Building in Washington, D.C. So they all get their jobs back. They get back in the building, they get all their emails back, and all electronic systems related to the operations of that agency, including all contracts and everything that applies both to employees and contractors. You need to stand that agency back up. Because what you have done to shut it down thus far, quote, likely violated the US Constitution in multiple ways. Now, this, of course, will be appealed. This will not be the final word. You know, even if Trump and his top campaign donor, Elon Musk, continue to lose this badly in court on this case, there's no telling how they'll try to finagle their way out of it anyway. But, you know, thinking about the dimmer switch between democracy and dictatorship, the courts here are drawing a line. And for all, you know, Trump and Musk's sadistic glee about calling these people who work for the US government criminals and, you know, removing their name from the building, and Elon Musk giggling and talking about putting it in a wood chipper, for all of their glee and sadism about this stuff, they're losing. They're losing under US law. USAID, as of today, is hereby ordered back into existence under federal law. Trump was also soundly beaten in court today on his effort to try to throw trans service members out of the military. Now, the judge's ruling in this case is very measured and calm, but it just rips the Trump administration for even trying to say this is legal. Essentially, the judge ruled in this case today that the Trump administration never actually presented a real legal argument for why they think they're allowed to do this. They just asserted with no supporting evidence that anybody who's trans, by definition, is unfit for military service. And legally, that's not how it works. The judge said the service records of the plaintiffs, the people who brought this case, who all have stellar military records, the judge points out that the experience of just these plaintiffs in the military disproves that they are somehow manifestly unfit just because of who they are. So the judge issued an injunction against the Trump administration in enforcing this new ban on trans people serving in the military. And the judge wrote this in her ruling, quote, "The court does not issue this preliminary injunction lightly. Judicial overreach is no less pernicious than executive overreach. But the coordinate branches must, by their mutual relations, be the means of keeping each other in their proper places." And that, of course, is a quote from the Federalist Papers from Federalist number 51 by James Madison. The ruling continues, quote, "The president and defendants could have crafted a policy that balances the nation's need for a prepared military and Americans' right to equal protection. They still can. But this ban is not that policy. The court therefore must act to uphold the equal protection rights that the military defends every day. The court's opinion is long, but its premise is simple. In the self-evident truth that all people are created equal, all means all. Nothing more, and certainly nothing less." End quote. Trump administration just had a terrible day in the nation's courts today. They lost in court on their efforts to fire tens of thousands of people who work for 18 different government agencies. They lost in court on shutting down USAID. They lost in court on discriminating in this way against trans people. And Republicans supporting Trump are facing incredible blowback in their home districts from their own constituents on all sorts of issues, on these and all sorts of issues. Look at this. In deep red Idaho yesterday, Republican Senator Mike Crapo tried to give a speech at a paid ticketed event in Boise, but the real news story there that was covered by all the local Idaho news outlets who tried to cover it were the hundreds of people, including many military veterans, who turned up and stood outside the event protesting Senator Mike Crapo, demanding that he stand up and try to stop Trump from what he's doing. Idaho. Yesterday in deep red West Virginia, big crowds that were eventually asked to move by the building owner. They were asked to move their demonstration, what turned out to be a large demonstration, outside the Morgantown, West Virginia offices of Republican Congressman Riley Moore. Again, West Virginia residents demanding that their Republican representative do more to stand up to Trump, do something to stand up to Trump. Georgia yesterday, Middle Georgia, the top story in the local news last night was this, yesterday afternoon. Constituents of Republican Congressman Austin Scott of Georgia, again, in this case, again, including many military veterans, outside his office, demanding that he meet with them, demanding that he take a stand and try to stop what Trump has been doing. He wouldn't meet with them, he won't go to a town hall, so they convened in the parking lot outside Congressman Austin Scott's district office in Middle Georgia. Up in Colorado Springs, Colorado, Congressman Jeff Crank was made into a cardboard cutout. They had this one standing up by a microphone. They had this little one that they propped up on what I think was a little can of Folgers, maybe? Look at this, hundreds of his constituents in Colorado Springs turned up to protest against Jeff Crank not standing up to Trump and refusing to meet with him about it. Look at this. This was also yesterday. Greensboro, North Carolina, 1,000 people turned up for a Republican U.S. Senator Thom Tillis town hall, at which Thom Tillis was represented by an empty chair. 1,000 people there in North Carolina mocking him for refusing to meet with them and for being too chicken to stand up to Trump on anything. And you know, nobody likes to be mocked. It's never a nice feeling, even if you deserve it. It's a whole different level of difficult to deal with, though, when the people who are mocking you are a choir of little old ladies who are mocking you in song.
Where are you now? Where are you now? Where could you be? Where could you be? Where are you now? Where could you be? Are you hiding at home? But you're chicken. Where could you be? Oh, Tillis, please. Oh, Tillis, please. Do your job. Do your job. Tillis, please. Just do your job. Oh, how I wanna be in that number when you finally do your job.
Greensboro, North Carolina, constituents of Republican Thom Tillis, who can hold a tune. For all the different ways that Donald Trump and his top campaign donor, defendant Elon Musk, are terrifying and turning off even their own voters, as we saw in those focus groups in Michigan. And all the ways they are terrifying and turning off and angering people who live in Trump Republican districts. For all the loss after loss after loss after loss they are being dealt in the courts. There's one other element of what's going on with Trump that I want to point out here as a matter of, I just think this needs to be factored in more regularly when we talk about the public reaction to Trump, when we talk about public opinion of what he's doing. Because there is one thing about his presidency that, I mean, for all of the other unpopular and failing things about this young presidency, there's one thing about this presidency that is just unprecedented in how radically out of step it is with the American people. There's such a difference between what Trump wants and what the American people want on one particular issue that I actually think it is not sustainable in normal small d democratic terms. So I want to stick a pin in this because I think this is important now and it's going to get more important as things get weirder and weirder. This is from the NBC News poll that just came out yesterday. Americans were asked, in the war between Russia and Ukraine, with which of those countries do you sympathize more? Ukraine, 61% of Americans said, I sympathize more with Ukraine. Russia, the proportion of Americans who say, I sympathize more with Russia is 2%. 2% sympathize with Russia. Americans are asked, okay, well, that's where your sympathies are. Where do you believe the president's sympathies are? Where do you think Trump's sympathies are? Ukraine, 8%. Russia, 49%. Overall, Trump is underwater by minus 13 points on his handling of the war between Russia and Ukraine. significant majority of the public thinks that he is wrong in his handling of the Russia-Ukraine war. Americans asked specifically, hey, what's your idea, what's your view on Russia? The proportion of Americans who view Russia positively right now is 6%. The proportion of Americans who view Russia negatively is 68%. How about Vladimir Putin, the guy? How about himself? The proportion of Americans who have a positive view of Vladimir Putin is 3%. The proportion of Americans who have a negative view of Vladimir Putin is 84%. Okay? So the American view on this is very clear. And the American people are very aware of how different Trump's view is to their own. All right? And this is, it's a statistical oddity. I'm not sure there's ever been anything like this before in presidential politics. But this is part of what the Trump presidency means. And it accounts for some of the weirdest stuff in it. I mean, today, in the midst of all the other chaos that he is wreaking in our own government, right? They're today amid the news that they really are apparently going to go ahead with this change at Social Security. They're going to force 80,000 retired and disabled Americans every week to physically go in person to Social Security offices that they are also shutting down and firing people from by the thousands, as they announced today that they really are going to do that. They're today amid the disaster scene at FDA headquarters, where they told 10,000 people to show up at an office that has 6,000 parking places with no chairs or offices for most of them. And that's how they're going to run the FDA now. They're today amid the news that they've just, fired hundreds of dam operators and engineers who operate the hydroelectric dams in 17 Western states. Accidentally fired all the people who keep the lights on and keep the dams safe there. I mean, there today, amid that sort of daily litany of that kind of wreckage, there's Donald Trump, twirling his hair and spending 2 hours on the phone with his bestie, Vladimir Putin. 2 hours on the phone, more than 2 hours on the phone, talking to his friend Vladimir Putin, who has, again, a 3% approval rating with the American people, because the American people know who he is. But for Donald Trump, there is nothing Vladimir Putin has done that is wrong. There is nothing Putin has done that he disagrees with, and there is nothing Putin has asked of him that he has not given and more. I mean, literally, as soon as he got off the phone today, we got word via NBC News that Trump now would like the United States to give up its military leadership role in NATO. The American military command of NATO has been in force since Eisenhower. Trump's going to give it up. It's weird, right? He didn't campaign on that. So many of the weirdest things about the Trump presidency, and a Trump presidency that is deeply dissatisfying even to people who voted for him, right? For a Trump presidency where he's underwater on almost everything he's doing. For a Trump presidency where he's more deeply underwater on his signature issue of the economy than he's ever been in his entire life in public office. In a Trump presidency where he loses more times in court on a single day than most presidents lose in court in a term. The weirdest stuff that Donald Trump is doing seems to relate to his relationship with and affinity for a foreign dictator for whom the American people give approval ratings of 3%. I mean, Trump is now talking, he's now said multiple times in public, that our border with Canada is an artificial boundary. That's how he's described it, an artificial boundary. What is that? Where is that from? Well, that is the way that Vladimir Putin talks about Ukraine. It's not the way any American has ever talked about North America ever before, but Trump now talks about Canada the way Putin talks about Ukraine. I mean, as you heard those Trump voters lament at the top of the show, Trump is doing all this stuff he never campaigned on. He is talking about a U.S. military invasion into Mexico. He is talking about a U.S. annexation of Canada. He is talking about the United States going to war with Denmark, which means NATO, in order to seize Greenland. He has talked about wanting to seize Gaza. He has talked about wanting to seize Panama and has ordered the Pentagon to develop war plans for U.S. troops invading Panama. Where did all this come from? I mean, for all the stuff he's doing, at least a lot of it was in the campaign. Maybe people didn't believe him. You heard those Trump voters there saying, I didn't know he'd actually do it. But this is stuff he didn't talk about at his rallies. He didn't publish tweets about this stuff. He didn't air ads about it. He didn't campaign on it. You didn't hear Panama and Greenland and Canada in the campaign, did you? But it's apparently what he is planning on doing now that he is in office, while he is talking frequently and at exorbitant length with his friend Vladimir Putin, who the American people approve of at a rate of 3%. I think this has to be a bigger part of what we think of when we think about the American public's reaction to the Trump presidency and American public opinion about Trump's behavior. When that NBC poll came out this week, pollster Jeff Horwit of Hart Research Associates, who conducted that poll along with a Republican pollster, Bill McInturff of Public Opinion Strategies, he said this about those Putin and Russia numbers and how differently the American people perceive Russia and how they believe their president perceives Russia. Hart said this, he said, quote, I cannot recall a moment in history when American public opinion and voters' views of a president as to which country they are more aligned with have been more in conflict with each other. The American public in conflict with its president on this point, which seems to be driving more and more of what this president is doing. The American people very clearly are very much against Vladimir Putin. The American president is very much for him. And that, amid everything else, is a test for us. Because in a democracy, that sort of divide should be unsustainable. That should be correctable by democratic means. Professor Tim Snyder joins us next.